Good evening and welcome to Sancta News. We bring you a breaking news story this evening as the Lord Braid has ruled that the Scottish Government's closure of churches was unconstitutional and a disproportionate interference of Article 9 of the European Court of Human Rights. The ruling is effective immediately. This will not change the current safety measures in churches and all safety precautions will still be fully observed. Earlier, we spoke to Canon Tom White, who discussed his thoughts on the implications of the ruling.
The result has been actually from a faith perspective, regardless of your view in terms of keeping each other safe, is that from a faith perspective, it's been a tremendous success because the court has definitively established that faith and the expression of worship is not unessential. And that's quite clear in Lord Braid's ruling that the respondent that in the case, which is the Scottish Government has treated the expression of one's faith and the practice of one's religion as something which is unessential, which is not. And that, regardless of what position you take in this, that's a tremendously important truth that was at the heart of this case, that people who need the nourishment of the sacraments, need to be nourished by God's word and have the desire to do so, should be able to do so in a safe manner. What is also interesting in the case is that I learnt a new word. Lord Braid said that the Scottish Government was being jejune at best and misleading at worst. And this seems to be a repetitive thread when it comes to this government. Jejune, I didn't know what it meant, I had to look it up, but it means being naive or unhelpful. And what the Scottish Government was saying was essentially that they hadn't closed places of worship. It was just happening online. So the reality was that someone could go into a church for a food bank, but as soon as they said the Lord's Prayer, they were committing a crime. Now, surely, goodness, I mean, that's a ridiculous scenario for us to be in a liberal, so-called liberal democracy, for public worship to be criminalised. And today's fine has reversed that. We're no longer criminal for opening up the doors and giving people space for God. We're not COVID deniers, we're following the science. But in terms of numbers of caps, now we have to see, part of the previous SSI, which is the Scottish Statutory Instrument, which governs these things, regulations, has been revoked. And we need to see what the next evolution looks like. Now, prior to the last set of restrictions, the caps and numbers were only guidance. They weren't regulation. And I think we'll probably revert back to that these numbers are for guidance. But the fact is, I come from a very capacious church. We can have 120 people with everyone 2 metres apart. So in many ways, these numbers of 20 at a funeral, 50 at Sunday Mass, are all totally arbitrary. And the court has found that there is no scope or latitude for arbitrariness when it comes to people's fundamental rights. So we need to keep each other safe, we have to exercise discipline, but we also need to celebrate our faith in the right and proper and fitting manner. Interestingly enough, whether I'll open the church right now, I'm just waiting on the interlocutor from the court so I can wave my bit of paper to a policeman if they decide that they're not going to go and stop drug addicts or armed robbers but want to arrest a priest for opening his church. So once I've got the court interlocutor, the first thing that I can do in the church, the liturgical calendar, is I can celebrate a vigil mass or evening prayer for the Feast of the Annunciation. And what did the Annunciation, the very first words of the angel Gabriel was, do not be afraid. And I'd say that to everybody out there, do not be afraid. But it is time that we as Christians start giving back to God what belongs to God. And today, this court ruling has told Caesar what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God, and due worship belongs to God, and the state needs to keep out of it.
Thank you for joining us on Sancta News. Good evening.